Shabbat Shalom. March is Women's History Month. You would think that given the fact that women are half the population, we wouldn't need a month dedicated to women. But the fact is that women's stories, experience, and expertise has not always been told, has not always been valued. So I do believe there is still a need to single out at least 1 month to begin to explore the role that women have played. In thinking about this in connection to this Parsha and this time of year, Women's History Month makes perfect sense. Why? At the beginning of the Parsha, God tells Moses to instruct the people to each bring machzit shekel, half a shekel for a purpose of a census. It says in Exodus chapter 30, Ze yutnu kol ha'over ha'pkudim machzit shekel v'shekel hakodesh, esrim geira ha'shekel machzit shekel truma ladonai. This they will give, every one that pass among them that are numbered, half a shekel after the shekel of the sanctuary. That shekel is 20 geras, half a shekel, an offering to God. This instruction immediately precedes the choosing of an architect to construct the Mishkan, the tabernacle. God instructs Moses to count the community in order to see who will benefit from and who will contribute to God's presence. But why half a shekel? This is puzzling. If this offering is for the purpose of a census, why would God give instructions in fractions? Wouldn't it be easier for each person to bring a whole shekel to represent themselves? What can be learned from this unusual system? Perhaps it is because God understood that people could not be complete alone, that only in the presence of other people would humans truly be complete. So too, here we are as a community, only whole if we celebrate all who are a part of it. But celebrating the concept of women in general isn't enough either. We need to know, how have women made a difference? How do we count their stories? How do we, in this new era of Me Too, understand that we need to listen to stories, share stories, and act? We need to understand that women throughout history in general, and Jewish history in particular, have found ways to make a difference, even if not through traditional means. This morning, in celebration of Women's History Month, I'd like to reflect on a few women in our tradition and women in literature so that we can have an understanding of the important role that women have played, even if we don't always hear their stories. I recently read the book Eternal Life by Dara Horn, a fantastical novel based on history and midrash. The protagonist, Rachel, has lived for 2,000 years, taking a vow never to die in order to save her young son, who, since he lived because of her vow, becomes none other than the famous Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. In a moment of tension between them, reflecting on the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans, Rachel berates her now adult son for choosing to save Judaism and Jewish learning by establishing the study hall at Yavna instead of asking the emperor to save Jerusalem, instead of asking the emperor to even save the temple. Rachel yells at her son, "The Romans destroyed it and you could have stopped them." But in response, her son said, "I did what I could. I did what was possible. I saved a story." "You are like a child. You saved your favorite book," she yells back. "Yes," he said, "because nothing matters more than a story." Rachel, as the book went on, soon began to realize that it was her motherly instincts to save her son is what saved Jewish learning. Rachel, through her sacrifice of her inability to die, you need to read the book to see why that is a sacrifice, modeled for us that one way of saving our people is saving our stories. The second lessons that we can learn from women are the two women of the Purim story that we just celebrated on Wednesday night and Thursday. As Rabbi Samantha Kahn reminds us, the two female role models in the story of Purim each teach two different paths for making voices heard. They are both change makers. They are both inspirational. But Rabbi Kahn argues that only one is worth emulating. Vashti was the queen before Esther. Her husband beckons her, presumably to come entertain his guests by dancing naked for them, in part in front of their drunken festivities, and she refuses. She stands up for herself. She was banished for the strength of her character. As Rabbi Kahn writes, I've always loved her. As an early feminist icon, for this young woman, Rabbi, to be Vashti filled me with pride each Purim. I knew the ancient rabbis spoke negatively of her, but a contrarian to the core, that only made me love her more. I longed to emulate her strength of character, her defiance of an unjust system, her fearlessly doing what was right. Esther, on the other hand, was a girl in the system. She played the game. She waited her turn. She made friends. She was careful about who she was and what she asked for and what she asked of them. Rabbi Kahn writes, I struggle with this, but actually these were the things that allowed her to save us all. These were the attributes of allowing her to be heard. This was the reason that Esther was able to make the real change. You see, in today's world, the Vashtis inspire us, but they are not necessarily the ones who have the influence. The people with the influence are also the Esthers, the one who stay close to power, who whisper in its ear, who bring new information and new insights. We might not always like their methods, but we need to realize that if we're not part of the conversation, if we're not a part of the story, if we don't have a seat at the table, then our ideas won't be heard. So how in this time of political defiance can we learn from Esther and make our voices heard? We can't only rail against the system, but we have to work within it. When we look at the world in which we live, we have to say we can't just tweet, we can't just post, we can't just complain. We might have to vote. We might need to run. I personally have 2 friends running for Congress this year who have decided, one in Pennsylvania, one in North Carolina, who have decided it's time to get to work. So support those who you believe in. And if you find that your representatives are doing things you disagree with, don't refuse to see them. Call them. Show up. Make your voices heard. Be like Queen Esther. A third set of women that I'd like to tell you about is also from a book of historical fiction, The Nightingale. In this book, 2 sisters use 2 very different methods. One gently befriending a Nazi in German-occupied France for the sake of something much greater. The other sister, an active part of the resistance, helping Allied soldiers to get out of France, each of them using their power of persuasion in very different ways, saved lives, saved stories, and saved small parts of our world. The characters in the book, The Nightingale, make us ask, what choices do we have when all choices are bad? How do women look out for people around them? How are our bodies used and not used in the most horrific of times? These 2 sisters did it one way and the other. Vienne hosted this Nazi. Isabel crossed mountains. But they both saved people, and they saved hope that there could be good people out there. As we think of the women who played roles during World War II, we need to learn their stories. We need to understand what was done. Not the ones that are published always in the books, but the ones that we need to learn about. So as they begin to pass away, we can tell their stories. In less than 2 weeks, we will come together and celebrate the Women's Seder with 4 congregations. As we do every year, we will honor women who have played a role in history. I'm very proud that this year, the 4 congregations, 2 are led by women rabbis, myself and Rabbi Gelber at Habonim, and 2 have women cantors, Shiri Kidron at Or Olam and Shana Postman at Town and Village. And this year, our 4 voices will come together to examine 4 women who, in their own ways, have shaped the lives and the stories of Israel since it's 70 years since the founding of the state. If you haven't yet signed up for the Women's Seder, I hope you do. Ki Tisa reminds us that all should be counted. Each of us have a role, male, female, young, old, Jew, someone who's not Jewish, all can play a role in our history and the destiny of the Jewish people. As we transition towards the book of Exodus with only 2 parshiot left, Exodus, which is the story of our whole community, the book of Exodus that reminds us how we went from slavery to freedom. Let us use this time to celebrate these women whose voices were muted for so long, but are now being uncovered. Shabbat Shalom.